Hello and welcome back to The Scriptures Are Real. I'm co-host Lamar, and this is Kerry Muhlestein.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, Professor. How are you?
I'm good.
Well, we've got a couple things to do. We probably are going to have to break this into two different podcasts, just because we got a lot to cover here. We're talking about Genesis 24 through 27 today. This is the story of Rebekah and how she comes into the scene and becomes Isaac's wife, and how do we end up with Rebekah? So just before we get started here, let's set the scene. Genesis 24, at the beginning of Genesis 24, Abraham is well stricken in age, and the Lord blesses Abraham in all things. This is great. I like this. He's blessed in all things, which means not only spiritually he has good things, but also he has material possessions. He has some wealth, right?
Yeah.
So he's doing well. He's got a good servant out there. And a little note on this servant before we go. The servant is not identified by name here. A lot of people think that this servant that's mentioned in verse 2, and Abraham said unto his eldest servant of the house that ruled over all he had. And we don't know who this servant is exactly. Now, we think it might be Eleazar, who is named later on in I'm not sure in Genesis. Do you know where he's named?
Well, actually, even earlier when he was wondering, am I going to have a son, or should I adopt my steward of my house, Eleazar? And so he, before Isaac is born, Eleazar is his steward or his servant, right? Yeah. And that's the question. You'd think that it's the same guy, but I mean, at this point, Isaac is like 40, and that was before he was born. So, of course, Abraham's still alive, so maybe Eleazar is too. I don't know, but it may or may not be the same guy, right?
Right. It's a common assumption that it probably is Eleazar, but we don't know. He's not named. But for whatever reason, or for all that it's worth, we don't know. But he is a very faithful servant, and he does exactly as he's told, which is great. So Abraham is well stricken in age, and he needs a bride for Isaac. Now, Isaac's about 40 years old.
Yeah.
It's about time to get married, don't you think?
Yeah, it seems like it. Brigham Young would tell him he needed to.
Brigham Young would have told him I can get out. But now remember, he's out in the middle of Negev at this time.
Yeah.
Are they the Negev? Yeah, I think
the Negev. That's that, which means like south, but the southern part, the more barren part. Although we have learned that it's probably wasn't as barren then as it is now, that they were in a particularly wet season then, but still, it's the middle of nowhere.
If you go out to Jerusalem sometime, and it's really fun there, it has some neat stuff. Basically, you get, to me, Israel is California. It's got all the things that California. It's got the coastal area, which is up against the Mediterranean, which is very similar to the wet seasons and everything that you would have in California. And then you got if you're in LA and you drove east and got out into Lancaster and further out into the you get in the desert area, which is just like going south of Jerusalem. You get into a desert area.
Which is where I served my mission, by the way, in the Lancaster area. Riverside, but then also out to Hesperia and Lancaster.
Okay, so it gets exactly like that. And of course, you get down to the Dead Sea, and what do we have in California? We have Death Valley, which is the same thing. So if you want to picture what Israel's like, it's like California. It's like Southern California, basically.
Yeah, or Nevada or Utah. All of those states have that same kind of that are along that longitude. Same thing. You've got the mountainous green areas up north, and you have some lakes and rivers, and then you get the kind of desert area, right? Moab, and Utah is named Moab because it really is a lot like Moab.
Like Moab, yeah.
And So whichever of those states you've been to, then you have very similar terrain. So
right. So anyway, a little side note there, but the idea is Isaac is out there. There's not a lot of people around there. They're kind of like their own little village. They're nomadic. They have a little bit of interaction, but they're in the land of the Canaanites. And in verse 3, he says, Abraham says, "Thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites." So a little note about that is Abraham calling all the Canaanites bad? Are they all bad?
It's hard to imagine that any group is all bad.
I love that statement. Yes, that's right. I don't think that's it. He's not saying that all the Canaanites are bad. Why can't they marry among the Canaanites?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a little complex because we do know I mean, from some things in the Bible and also the Book of Mormon, that eventually, and it's going to take 400 years, that the Canaanites are going to be deemed worthy of destruction because they're refusing to repent and just won't turn to God, but they're going to get this long chance in between. So we're going to say that there's certainly elements of Canaanite culture that are problematic: child sacrifice, human sacrifice, the fertility rites and focus on that, and all sorts of things that are problematic. And yet, there are also a lot of, I mean, Abraham meets some pretty good and respectable Canaanites. I have a friend, Dr. Daniel Belknap. We should get him on with us sometime, but
sure.
Who studied Ugaritic, which is a language of a bunch of Canaanites. So he knows Canaanite texts as well as anyone. And he says, I find a lot of redeeming things about the Canaanites. So they certainly have some practices that are going to spiral their culture into some problems, but there are also some pretty decent elements and some pretty good people that Abraham meets that he seems to get along with and respect. And so you got a mixed bag, right? So it's not just that. If it were only that, then probably you could search for that kind of, really good family somewhere among the Canaanites that Isaac could marry someone. But for reasons we don't fully understand, the covenant is restricted. So we get this more, say, in the period of Adam, from Adam to Enoch, right? We have these families that have chosen to covenant with Satan and families that have chosen covenant with God. And if you've chosen to covenant with Satan, then you don't covenant with God, right? That makes sense to me. How that restriction happens after Noah is more tricky. We just don't have enough information. So we know that at least some of Ham and maybe all of Ham's descendants, I don't know, we just don't have enough information, aren't going to have an opportunity to hold the covenant. I don't know why. And so I'm going to assume the Canaanites are descended from that, and so they can't. But why would they can't not be able to hold the covenant when it was generations before? Or is it just because really they have gotten so steeped into fertility rites and child sacrifice that God is saying, no, the covenant can't go here right now? Or in the end, we just don't know the answer. And every time we've tried to assume and figure it out, we've done things and said things that are probably incorrect. So it's best just to say, we don't know. What we do know is that the covenant's not going to go to any of these Canaanite kids.
Right. Now, I've explained it a couple of times before. People have asked me about this kind of thing. And I said, I don't really know the reason why, but the Lord seems to work with certain people at certain times. And like, for instance, the Levites were the only ones that had the priesthood at the time of even before Christ, but during that time up into Christ, only the Levites held the priesthood. And eventually it extends out to more and more people. And remember, even Peter's like, he doesn't want to go to the Gentiles. I'm not taking the unclean animals. That's not. And the Lord says, I've cleansed it. But does that mean those people were always bad?
No,
I don't think so at all. It means that the Lord is working with certain people at certain time for whatever his reasons are. That's the deal.
Yeah, we really don't fully understand it.
Right.
And I mean, I'll throw in that at least for part of the time where we say only the Levites could hold the priesthood, there were Midianites that held the priesthood, right?
Okay.
I mean, because the Midianites, like Jethro, ordained Moses, and I'm assuming it didn't end right then. Okay, well, now we're done with the priesthood, so get rid of it, right? So there were some Midianites that held the priesthood, but we kind of lose track of that story. We only know what happens to them when they interact with the Israelites. So there's stuff going on with priesthood and covenant that we just don't know.
Right.
And that's what we need to keep in mind, is that there's a lot of stuff we don't know.
That's right. But what we know now is that the Lord is very keen on having the covenant continue through Abraham. He's blessed. He's given Abraham the blessings that he will have these many people, and that the covenant, the Savior and all that will come through him. And so it's very important to keep the covenant, at least at this period of time, to be in the covenant. So enough said on that. We're going to move on to where he says to Abraham says to his servant, go fetch a wife for my son Isaac. We need to get him married. He's 40 years old. Come on, let's get popping here. So they sends him out, and
with that strict instruction, it has to be someone from this line, right?
So you got to go north. Go north and find a son. And there's kind of a curious. Go ahead. You have something to say?
No.
There's a kind of a curious statement here. there's a covenant that takes place, and he says, I pray that you put my hand under my thigh, in verse 2. Now, we don't really know what that means. Some people have thought that it means that you put your hand on the thigh or near the thigh, and there's we don't even know exactly what it means. Joseph Smith says something different about the way that is. I think all we need to cover here is there's nothing crazy. All it is it's a form of a covenant, and whatever it meant to them. It could be put your hand on my thigh, and you put your hand over it and say, okay, I don't know what that means, but it's a form of covenant. But what we take away from that is it's a solemn covenant.
Yeah.
It's not just a, hey, by the way, head on out, do this and that. It's, hey, swear unto me that by the Lord of heaven and earth, thou shalt not take a wife from my. So it's a solemn covenant with his servant to go get a wife for him that is in the covenant, right?
And I would guess that there are a lot of people in different times and places that would think that us putting one hand on the Bible and raising the other arm up into square would just seem weird to them. Like, what's that about? That's just kind of weird why are they doing that, right? It's just some kind of gesture or meaning that has a meaning to them, and we don't know why. We lost the story behind why, which, like, in some ways we've kind of lost some understanding of why we do what I just said, or like a handshake.
Put our hand on the Bible.
If we research it, we can kind of find it. But I'd say if you were to ask, most people are, I don't know why we do that.
Okay, so anyway, just get a couple things out of the way so that we can get tripped up on those things.
Yeah.
So
and I do think it's interesting to note he's going to send him back to his family, where he has family to find someone, because remember when we did back like Abraham chapter 1, and Abraham said, I could trace that I came from these fathers that could hold the covenant. I am of the line that can hold the covenant. So the group that he knows can have the covenant. There are probably others out there, but the group that he knows can have the covenant are the same people he's descended from, right? That family. So that's where he's going to send him, so that he doesn't have any questions about it.
Very good. Okay, and you just covered verse 4. Shall go into my country, he says, and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac. So he sends him to the land of his fathers, and they go. So now what do we know about? Here's a couple of historical details, just so we kind of know, to put this in perspective. So Isaac is born around 1900 BC is when he would be born. So this is, give or take. We're working with broad bands here.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And Isaac is about 40 years old when he meets and marries Rebekah. And we'll get to Esau and Jacob here a little bit later. But Esau and Jacob were born 20 years later. And by the way, as we record this, it is Valentine's Day. And so this is a nice little love story. You don't see a lot of love stories like this, but this is a love story that really turns out.
Love, true love.
Exactly. And I was saying to you before before we started the podcast, I don't have a lot of experience with arranged marriages. So this seems completely foreign to me, but it worked out for them.
Yeah.
And
as a parent, I'm kind of becoming more in favor of arranged marriages. But, I'm not saying anything about my children's spouses. I'm just saying, like, it's harder for me to let them have that kind of free agency. I'm like, whoa, I think I know better than you do. But
anyway. when you know what's out there, you're like, oh my goodness, not that. I've seen that before. Okay. So anyway, here's what we know about Rebekah, which is interesting. She's very beautiful. In fact, the Joseph Smith translation says that it was the most beautiful woman the servant had ever seen.
Yeah.
So pretty good score there.
Glad to be descended from Grandma Rebekah. Makes me feel good about myself.
Yeah, that's very good. And one of the key things, so he sets up a little bit of a symbol or a sign or a test, and he's like, hey, if I ask this lady who's going to give me a drink from her pitcher, and she offers to do these, gives me a drink, then I'll know that's the one. And man, if we could do that kind of thing, that would be awesome. I mean, if we could set up a little test. The Lord doesn't usually like those things, but for whatever reason, he seems to go along with it here.
Yeah, and actually, I think we're a little funny sometimes as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about signs, because we know, like Joseph Smith teaches, Christ teaches a wicked and adulterous generation seeks for a sign. Joseph says if someone seeks for a sign, you can be sure they're an adulterer, right? And so we don't like signs very much as a result. But I think that that's a specific kind of sign. That's the kind of sign that says, I'm not going to believe until you prove to me that I should believe, right? Which in the end isn't belief. And we see that in the Book of Mormon as well. This whole, I'm not believing until you show me for sure. And I think that's the kind of sign that God doesn't like. But God does not seem to be opposed to signs where you already believe and you're acting on that belief. And you say, I'd like some help or some guidance here to know exactly what it is you want me to do, or to know for sure that you're with me. We're going to see that with Gideon. We're going to see that in any number of cases. And this is one of those times where the servant's already acting in faith. He's just saying, help me to know if this is the right thing. And I'm going to say, I think it's this is a cool servant. I mean, I don't have any servants, but if I had one, I'd want one like this. So, and I want to be clear, I'm not looking for servants. But anyway, but the servant is brilliant in the fact that the sign he gives will automatically give Isaac a very service-oriented wife, right? And
Yes.
if I could choose for my spouse, my children, to have a spouse with a certain characteristic, a spouse who is selfless and service-oriented, what better characteristic to have in a spouse, really?
I think that is a super point. And I wanted to mention the same thing. We have a service-oriented servant or messenger, and then we have a service-oriented woman here who's going to become Isaac's wife. And there's a really good, strong evidence that service is the key here. Be of good service. So let's say maybe you're not looking for a servant, but maybe if you are a servant or you're serving in some capacity, try to do it well. Be of good service to people.
Yeah, I mean that's what the Lord wants from all of us, right? To be servants to each other, and to serve each other, to be the least among us, right?
Right.
Absolutely. And before we go on, I'm just going to point out one other thing, just almost from a literary element, but I think it is interesting. When we think of the great patriarchs and matriarchs, right? We can say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We can even go Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. We can say Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, Leah, Zilpah, Bilhah,
Ruth,
Asphah, Paneah. Yeah. The one we really know the least about, well, besides Asphah, which is Joseph's wife, the one we know the least about is Isaac. We really never find out very much about Isaac. In the stories we know about Isaac, Isaac plays a role that is ancillary to Abraham's when we're getting the near sacrifice of Isaac. We have a little bit about Isaac in terms of later on his doing something like his dad, like, hey, don't kill me, she's my sister, and let's work out stuff with wells. But in the end, he's just doing exactly what his father had done. They're both stories that are just repeats of what his father had done. When we get the story that we'll also talk about with the blessing to Jacob, this is just really a story about Jacob and Rebekah, and Isaac is again almost ancillary. I mean, he's important, but he's not the major character ever. And we don't ever learn that much about him. This story is more about the servant and about Rebekah than it ever is about Isaac. And I'm not saying anything bad about Isaac in this, but I think that it's interesting that it's these two service-oriented people who are the focal point of this particular story.
Right. That's great. It's really interesting. We don't really have that much. I didn't think about that. We always think them all grouped together, but there really isn't a whole lot. There's a lot said. You always think about Isaac, the one that was sacrificed, and that's a story about him for sure. And I'm sure there's some faith on his part there, but you don't hear. I mean, you hear a lot about Abraham, and there's a lot about Jacob. But you're right. Yeah. Isaac does kind of get moved over a little bit. Maybe there's another book out there somewhere that we don't have in our current collection that tells of all the great things that Isaac did. But
I'd like
we
that
don't
book.
have it.
Yeah.
If that's out there. So let's move on here. So in verse 14, this is what he says to the Lord. He's like, he prays the Lord, and he says, behold, it shall come to pass, if the damsel whom I shall say, let down thy pitcher, I pray thee, let me drink, or that I might drink, and she shall say, drink, and I will give it those camels also. Now it's kind of a big ask. He's got 10 camels with him.
Yeah.
So if I say, hey, I'm going to ask this lady for a drink, and if she gives me a drink and wants to feed all my camels too, that's going to be the one. seems to be a tall ask, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is. So let's talk about the camels for a
Okay.
second. These are probably Bactrian camels if you're into, if you're a camel aficionado. But anyway,
Wait, what did you call them?
Bactrian. There are a couple different kinds of camels. That's the
Okay.
kind of camels that they seem to have around there at that time period. But in any
I
case,
know dromedary, and that's about it.
So it's not that. Those are the two main ones, Bactrian or dromedary. And these are camels that on a long journey can drink anywhere at the end of a long journey, which they go on. This is quite a while, quite a space between down in the Negev, the Beersheba area, and so on, up to the Haran area. This is going to take them weeks, and there is some water along the way, but still, it's a long journey. So they can drink anywhere between 20 and 50 gallons. So if we just shoot for the middle and we say 30 gallons
each,
and then you say there are 10 camels, that's 300 gallons, right? So now keep in mind, it's not just pouring 300 gallons. This is a well. So you have to lower something down into the well with a rope, get it full of water, pull it up. It's heavy. Water is one of the heavier things to carry of anything. It's very dense, very heavy.
8 pounds per gallon.
Yeah. So that's pulling it up and then taking it to the trough and dumping it and then going and doing it again. 300 gallons, right? That's why this is such a brilliant sign, because anyone who offers to do that, you're like, hey, hard worker and happy to serve people, because she doesn't have to do that. It's just a nice, strong, capable, hardworking person. That's who I'd choose for my sons or daughters if I could.
Yeah.
Right. I'm so happy. Like I said, I'm happy to be descended from Rebekah. This is a badge of honor. She's a fantastic person.
I hope that I would be as willing to serve. I'd be like, here's my picture. I'm going to leave it here. Yeah. Just go ahead. I'm down the road over here. If you want to bring my picture back.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I'll just see you 45 minutes later when you're done with this. Right.
Yeah. 300 gallons. 300 gallons would be enough even if you were pumping it, but 300 gallons to draw out of a well. And
just think of that. I mean, she's probably drawing out a couple gallons at a time. So, but let's say 150 times of pulling 16 gallons up with a rope like this. That's some muscle burn by the end of that. Yeah. You're tired.
Oh, maybe she worked out a lot.
Yeah, she was buff,
drawing a lot of water.
Yeah.
So he says,
buff and beautiful. We're right.
Buff and beautiful. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's
my grandma.
Really? That's awesome. Oh, your great grandma. Yeah,
great grandma Rebekah. Yeah.
She's that sort. Anyway, so she does that, and so what happens? Exactly that came to pass. Before he's done speaking, behold, Rebekah came out, who was born in Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother. Anyway, she comes down there and she was very fair to look upon. So that's high praise in the Bible. Nowadays, if you said to somebody, honey, you're fair, doesn't carry the same weight. But back then, this was hot stuff. Yeah. So she was very fair to look upon. And like I said, Joseph Smith said that his interpretation was that this was the most beautiful woman this messenger has seen. So anyway, that's saying.
Of course, he lived in the middle of nowhere. He'd hardly seen anyone ever, but I'm just joking.
No, Rebekah's awesome. So, all right. Okay. And so she's virgin, and she is very.
Which is important. It's good that she's not married, right? I mean, that wouldn't work well. Yeah. Yeah.
Fill the picture and then like, oh, by the way, I'm married. Ding, ding, ding. No. All right. Okay. So, so she comes up, she feeds it, and the messenger drinks. The camels drink, and they're all set up. So they've got a great, and so she invites them over. Come on over, meet my family.
And you get this great thing where he says in verse 23, whose daughter art thou? Tell me, I pray thee, is there room in thy father's house for us to lodge in? And she said, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, which she bare unto Nahor. And you have to see this servant going like, oh man, this is working out well, right?
Oh yeah.
So she's did this sign. It's from exactly the family that Abraham was hoping I'd go to. It's one of those times where you're just like, Lord, you're taking care of me. I can see the hand of the Lord in everything that's happening here. Thank you, Lord. And I would guess literally he was saying, thank you, Lord.
I bet that's true. Maybe he scored the first time around. Maybe the Lord led him to exactly that place. I don't know. Maybe he'd been to 300 other wells and no one gave him to drink. I don't know. We don't know that, but we know that he scored this time, and it works out great. She's beautiful. She's willing to serve. She is
from a covenant, lineage, possible family. Yeah,
perfect. So And to Rebekah's credit, she recognizes that she's willing to serve, and he's like, hey, I've got a husband for you, and you should come out here. And she's willing to go. She's willing to leave her family and probably not see her family maybe ever.
Yeah,
It's a long
that
ways.
seems to be the case. It does seem to be goodbye to my family forever. I will go to meet some people I've never met and stay with them forever. I have to believe that Rebekah was both inspired and courageous.
She'd have to be. You'd have to be. And I think I think that you're right. It requires both of those, because you can be faithful and have your heart fail you and not be courageous. Yeah. And you can be courageous and charge off in the wrong direction. So, but I think you're 100% right. I think she had to be faithful and she was courageous, and she had to have had some confirmation, because what faithful, serving daughter wants to just head off with strange people, So anyway, well, that's what we know about her. And she's, by the way, just so you know, she's probably about 20 years old now, is what we know. If it says elsewhere that she was 20 years younger than Isaac, and we know that Isaac's about 40 in this time frame, so she's about 20. Depending on how long it took her to get to and from or whatever, she could be anywhere 18, 19, 20. We don't know. But in that band, again, we're working with broad swaths here, so don't pin me down exactly. But she's roughly 20 years old. So just that gives you a little background and perspective on who Rebekah is and how faithful she is, and what a great example to us of a willing person who stepped up at the right time, and she's going to have some tough things happen to her and to the whole family. But overall, she does the right thing, and she is a good clutch player.
Absolutely agree. And one of the role models for all of us, both in this story and throughout the rest of the stories that we'll read about her, where she seems to be someone who is both sensitive to the Spirit. We're going to see that again and again. She's sensitive to the Spirit. The Lord speaks to her, and then faithful to what she has learned through inspiration or revelation, and willing to, whether it be in this story, leave her family almost immediately, like no time to say, oh, let's have a couple of weeks together where we enjoy each other for the last time. It's I'm off, I'm out of here. And so she's quick to follow that inspiration and be obedient to it. We're going to see it in the story of seeking to get the blessing for Jacob. What she learns is she's pregnant, and then seeking to get the blessing for Jacob. She receives inspiration. She acts on it. I'll just tell you, personally, if I could choose my own epitaph, right, what someone would say about me after I died, and I don't know that this is what someone would say about me. I don't know if it's true, but it's what I'm aspiring to have be true about myself. It is that he sought to learn the will of the Lord, and then he did it. Right. That's what I'd like to have said of me. And I think that I just described Rebekah. Right. That's Rebekah seems to receive inspiration, and then she does it.
Very good. I couldn't say it any better. I think that's fantastic. And if I could steal your epitaph, I would do that for myself too. If that's, it would be, everybody should aspire to be what Abraham is called, the friend of God. And she certainly fits in that family. If Abraham's a friend of God, Rebekah is a friend of God, certainly.
Yeah, I agree. And it must be nice for her to go down and meet Abraham and all that stuff. I mean, she's coming into a pretty great family, but she doesn't really know it at that point. You do wonder what she knows, right? So remember that Abraham left these folks behind in Haran because they weren't continuing to follow him in worshiping Jehovah only. And we know that this family that she's in has idols. We know this from the later story with Jacob and Rachel and Leah. This is an idolatrous family. We know that, but it's not that far removed where she probably hasn't heard stories of Abraham. I mean, she must have heard those stories, and she knows something about who he is and what he stood for. And again, it kind of feels like, even though she may not have come from a fully correct environment, that she's pretty correct herself. Again, I really am so impressed with Rebekah and so pleased to be descended from Rebekah.
That's fantastic.
I'm bragging all over the place, aren't I?
That's excellent. Anyway, there's a few women that we hear a little bit about, but this is one that's really great to focus on. Rebekah is a fantastic role model and a great pinpoint. So I'm glad we got to spend a little bit of time. In fact, I think that's probably going to do it for this podcast. We'll get to this is Abraham 20, or excuse me, this is Genesis 24. And Genesis 24 is a long chapter. I mean, as far as chapters goes, it goes on for a while. And
67 verses.
67 verses. And the end of the story of this chapter, anyway, is that they go back down and Rebekah sees Isaac, and I like this. This is a great term. I'm sorry. Just to give you some context, they're going back down. They meet them. She sees this guy in the field. She says, the messenger.
Yeah, and I love he's out meditating, right? That's a great thing about it. That's the one little thing we learn about Isaac. He's out meditating. That's good.
Yeah, meditating, praying, pondering the scriptures, whatever he's doing.
Yeah, something.
He's doing something. He's doing what
he's communing while she's commuting is what's happening.
Oh, there's our commune again.
Yeah.
Doggone it, that works out. Yes. So he's doing what he should be doing also. So let's give props to Isaac. He's doing what he should be doing. And she sees him and says to this messenger, "Who's that?" And hey, that's Isaac. And this is she lighted off her camel.
Yeah.
So she dismounted.
Yeah.
But
she's
there's
like jumping and ready to go.
There's a couple of, I don't know what the Hebrew word is. The Hebrew word is something like, it translates to fell off the camel.
What's the verse? I can't remember.
The verse is 64 in verse 24. 64. The point I'm getting to here is that it sounds like she's enthusiastic. She doesn't just kind of get off and amble over to him. It seems like she's enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Let's meet my husband. And one last thing about that, she also covers herself with a veil. Now,
it is. It's from the verb for nofel, which does mean to fall. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean necessarily like she totally fell down. You can also do it like when you put yourself down, or you lie down, or you throw yourself down. So I would say maybe a better translation is probably, and she threw herself off of the camel.
Right.
So yeah, she's
exactly
rushing over there. That's so I had never noticed that before. That's pretty cool.
It's enthusiastic is what I'm getting at. It seems like she doesn't just get down and walk over there. She's enthusiastically meets Isaac. And there's
with her veil on.
With her veil on. But let's talk about that. I was about ready to be done, but let's just talk about that real quick about the veil. The veil now is a symbol. A lot of people have said, Middle Eastern women, or the women of the Bible, they covered them up and they did all these things. And this is again where we don't know all the reasons why, but this was a sign of respect at this point. It's not that she is trying to hide anything, and it's not necessarily subservience either. I mean, it could be respect. You could call that subservience in a way that you might to a new family member or whatever. But this is not a veil in this time is not a punishment, is what I'm getting at. It's not. We're not putting him in a bag and hiding him in the corner. That's not what this means. This means that she is being proper and respectful. And some Bible commentators I've heard even said that it is significant of the marriage covenant that she's going to enter into. She's presenting herself as a bride, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the brides seem to take their veil off later in the wedding night, right? And so on. And so we get that tradition in a number of places. And sometimes it does seem for us just odd that these different little traditions or conventions, right? So maybe I can just use an example of one in my own life. My wife's grandparents, salt of the earth, best people you could ever meet, right? Literally Idaho potato farmers, and just the best people. And they eventually sold their farm in Idaho and moved down, and we were the closest family members to them. So we were quite often going over and helping them out and taking care of them. We were very close to them for a lot of years. And towards the end of their life, just after I think they'd done their 73rd wedding anniversary, and my wife's parents were talking to them, they were saying, yeah, that Kerry, and at this point I'm like 40 something, that Kerry, he's such a nice boy, we like him so much, just the one thing we don't get is that he leaves his hat on when he comes in the house, right? Because I'd be at their house like doing I'd have my baseball cap on because I was mowing their lawn and helping them with this and that and so on, and then I'd come in and I knew that like 100 years ago, people took their hat off when they came in the house, but I didn't think anyone did that anymore. I didn't think anyone cared about it anymore, but apparently they did. Right. And so that was the thing that they thought was just, and no one that I knew ever currently did that. So it was just a old antiquated thing to me, but to them, it was a real deal. And it was a sign of respect. That's what it was to them, was a sign of respect. And to be honest, I don't know why taking your hat off when you come in a house is a sign of respect. I kind of think about like Jews, where it would be a sign of disrespect to take your hat off.
Right.
Yeah. So, but each culture has its own little custom that's a sign of respect. And I don't think sometimes we read more into it than we should.
Well, and look at this. You find any picture, even in the United States, find a picture of men outside and they always have a hat on.
Yeah.
Unless there's some reason why. But that was my grandfather. I have one of my grandfather's hats, and he always had a bunch of hats that he would wear when he went out when he was younger. And later in life, he didn't wear hats all the time. But in the before 1940s, you look at any picture and people have jackets and vests and coat and hats on. That's a proper thing. So what your grandparents were probably responding to was, you put your hat on, that's an outside garment. You put that on when you go outside, that's a proper outside garment. It's not proper in the house. Hats have their place. So in this case, the veil has its place for her. And so this is one more thing that we know about her, is that she has good manners.
Yeah.
She
and it's interesting. She doesn't feel she needs to be veiled around Eleazar, right?
No,
so it's not that around all men she has to be veiled. There's something about approaching Isaac before the wedding where she has to be veiled. And we just don't fully understand the custom, but I'd say let's not read too much into it.
No, I that's
in a negative way. Yeah, I know that's what you're saying. Yeah.
No, I think that it's a sign of what we know is it's a sign of respect, and very possibly she's presenting herself in a bridal way. She's like, I am your bride. This is kind of looking like this is a foreshadowing of the marriage ceremony. So anyway, I just didn't want anybody to look at that and go, oh no, this is one of those things we got to hide the people under a tarp and whatever. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a sign of respect, and one more thing to her credit, that she is well mannered and respectful and joins the family and goes on to have great prosperity and progeny and all that stuff.
And enthusiastic. And I have to guess that Abraham and Isaac felt like they needed to give this servant a bonus by the time they were all done with this. Like, oh wow. Okay, man. We sent you out and you came back with someone good. Thank you for coming back with someone so wonderful.
This guy is great. I like to meet this guy someday. He has some good adventures and did some good things. All right, gang. Look, we've got through 24. It's a long chapter. Next time we're going to hit. We'll break it into two. We'll do this another recording right now, but we're going to do 25, 26, 27 next, and we'll hit all those things, and we'll get all the way up to Jacob and Esau.
Yeah. And maybe I can just throw in one thing.
Sure.
Like, as you said, it's a long chapter, and I love like the stuff we talk about with it. And I love other podcasts and things like that. And we want to enhance your scripture study, but the key is to enhance your scripture study. We don't want to replace your scripture study.
Oh, no, not at all.
Make sure you are still studying the scriptures. Our key is that there's power in the scriptures. That's what we're all about. So go and read those scriptures and get the power out of them.
Perfect. Yes, read the scriptures for yourself, and we're going to add a little color in there and help to understand some harder passages, and particularly when it becomes personal to us. And it's when I get to know these people, when I get to see them as people and not just stories. These are people and things that happen. And as you said, these are our forebears. These are our generation, or generations that we came from. So I'm happy to know my great grandmother.
Right. Yeah. And as you said, like it's the little things about the gallons of water and things like that make those stories become real to me. So thanks for reminding. I should have said that then, but anyway, thanks for reminding me.
That's great. No, perfect. All right, gang. Thanks a lot for joining us on The Scriptures Are Real. Please like and subscribe. Not for us necessarily, but to try to share this with the people. If this is helpful for you, if it's helping you understand, if it's helping you to feel more connected with the Scriptures, share it. Tell people about it. Let's get some more people involved in this and get in there and reading the scriptures and being engaged with the word. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.